Hey guys, so we're on the Integumentary system today, and I'm sorry that my voice sounds bad. I have a really bad mic now. My other mic broke, so you're not really gonna get as good of a sound. But so this is part one of the Integumentary system. I'm hoping to have two parts, maybe three, but we'll see how it goes. So let's start off. Let's start off with the skin and its layers. So basically, basic skin anatomy. So there are two layers of the skin. There's the epidermis and the dermis. There's another layer that we talk about because it does share some functions of the skin, but it's not considered part of the skin. It's called the hypodermis, or the subcutaneous fascia, subcutaneous layer, or also known as the superficial fascia. Um, so here's some skin anatomy. So as I said, the two layers, epidermis, the dermis. Then there's the subcutaneous layer, which is not considered part of the skin, though it does share some functions. It helps you. It helps you, for example, when you receive a blow to the skin, like when someone punches you, um, your skin kind of slides on that subcutaneous layer. Um, so here are a few characteristic things of the skin. So there's dermal papilla right here, which we'll talk about. Here are a few glands. So sebaceous gland, a sweat gland. This is called a Pacinian Pacinian. I can never pronounce these right. But Pacinian corpuscle. Um, then there's also Meissner's corpuscle. There should be nerves going throughout this, but it's not being shown. There should be nerves surrounding this hair plexus right here. Oh well. Um, let's see. There are capillaries all over the place. There's this what's called an erector pili. Pores, hair. That's it. So let's continue. Um, Epidermal layers. So there are 4 to 5 epidermal layers. There are 5 in your palms, the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. There are 4 everywhere else. So the first layer is the stratum basal, the most deep layer is the stratum basal. So this contains mitotically active keratinocytes. Keratinocytes are epidermal cells, and they make up most of the cells in your epidermis. Um, and then after that, there are also melanocytes, and melanocytes secrete a pigment called melanin. You may have heard of it before. Melanin is the skin pigment that makes your skin color. Um, and Merkel cells are also there. Merkel cells are receptor cells, and we'll talk about their functions a little bit later. Um, let's just say, but I want to mention that Merkel cells are connected to little discs in the dermis called Merkel discs. There's also the stratum spinosum, which is is superficial to the basal layer, and it has several layers of filamentous prickle cells, and they're spiny, and that's why they're called prickle cells. Spinosum means prickly, and these prickle cells they're prickly because of the desmosomes. You start seeing the desmosomes that connect them. Langerhans cells are also abundant here. Langerhans cells are basically macrophages of the epidermis. Now, there's the stratum granulosum, which is around 3 to 5 layers thick, and it contains keratohyalin, um, keratohyalin actually, and lamellated granules. It's not keratinohyalin, but keratohyalin. And they can secrete not keratin, but keratohyalin, so keratohyalin granules secrete keratohyalin, which help which help with keratin production. And then after that, there's lamellated granules, which contain a waterproofing glycolipid, which gives your skin that waterproof characteristic. Now, cells start dying in the granulosum, and you'll see why in a moment. I'll show you in the picture later. So then there's the stratum lucidum, which is a thin, clear layer of skin. It's only found in the thick skin. And then there's stratum corneum, which is 20 to 30 dead cell layers. Now, these dead cells, keep in mind, are very thin, though, and it acts as an overcoat, protective layer. It contains keratin, which gives it its tough characteristic. It also contains those waterproofing glycolipids, which I talked about, which prevent water loss, but also prevent water from coming in. And this is what this layer flakes often. So so whenever you see someone flaking off their dandruff, you're seeing the cells of their stratum corneum. So here's a little picture here. So the cells start dying in the stratum granulosum because Okay, so it takes nutrients from the dermis, but there are no capillaries since this is epithelia. So it can keep on sending up nutrients up towards the top, but then after that it just gets too far in the stratum granulosum, so they start dying there. Anyway, moving on. So the dermis is made up of connective tissue, collagen, and elastic fibers strengthen this layer, and elastic fibers actually give this layer its stretch recoil characteristic. And the two layers of the dermis are the papillary layer and the reticular layer. The papillary layer makes around 20% of the dermis. It has areolar connective tissue. It's filled with vessels, filled with capillaries, and it connects to the dermis via the dermal papillae. You remember those hills that we saw that in the boundary between the epidermis and the dermis. Those are your papillae. It contains Meissner's corpuscles, free nerve endings, capillary loops, and also dermal ridges. And these dermal ridges are like deep hills that give way to epidermal ridges, which form fingerprints. Um, then after that, there's the reticular layer, which is 80% of the dermis, and it contains dense irregular connective tissue. So collagen runs in different planes, but usually parallel to the surface, and less dense regions of collagen bundles form cleavage or tension lines, which are important for surgeons because if you cut parallel to those lines or along those cleavage lines, it makes a cleaner cut and it's easier to and that cut's easier to heal. But if you cut across those lines rather than parallel to them, what's going to happen is it's going to make a really gross looking scar afterward, and it's not going to heal as well. Um, so also another type of line that I want to talk about is the flexure lines. So flexure lines are like little folds. You see the lines on the boundaries where you can flex your knuckles. Well, that's because when you flex your knuckles, the skin folds in that area, and since it's at a joint, it's not really flexible at that area, so it has to fold with the skin, and that's how those lines on your knuckles were formed. Um, so let's talk about a homeostatic imbalance for a moment. So stretch marks. So they're not better known as striae, they're better known as stretch marks, but they're also known as striae. And they're tears in the dermis due to stretching of the skin. And blisters, there's another homeostatic imbalance. A blister is actually separation between the dermis and the epidermis. And there's fluid within that space. Now let's go to the next topic, skin appendages. So you have your glands. So they're sweat glands. So there are two types of sweat glands, and they're all merocrine glands. If you don't know what that is, you have to go back to tissues. But eccrine glands and apocrine glands. An apocrine gland, sweat gland, is actually a misnomer. They are actually merocrine glands. They're ceruminous glands and mammary glands. So eccrine glands are found all over your body. But apocrine glands are famous for their body odor, the sweat that secretes body odor. And it's actually not your fault, not the sweat's fault. It's actually bacteria on your skin. So what happens is, so the difference between apocrine glands and the eccrine glands is the type of sweat that they secrete. Oh yeah, these secrete sweat. Surprise! Anyway, so eccrine glands secrete 99% water, 1% salt. Apocrine glands secrete a majority of water, but also it secretes salt and some fats and some proteins. And these attract bacteria on the skin. And so what happens is the bacteria decompose those proteins and those fats, and it gives it that terrible body odor that you have whenever you're, for example, say on your first date. So let's say whenever you're on a date with someone and you're sweating real hard and you have that body odor, don't blame it on, don't say it's your fault. Say it's the bacteria on your skin. Anyway, then there's ceruminous glands, so they secrete cerumen, which is your earwax basically. And it's a lot more firm than earwax is obviously a lot more firm than apocrine glands, so there are more proteins and fats inside your cerumen. And then there are mammary glands. So yeah, those secrete milk, mother's milk, found in the breasts, and yes, milk can be considered sweat. So sebaceous glands, they are holocrine glands, and these secrete an oil called sebum, and it's secreted into a hair follicle. Now, sebum lubricates the skin, it prevents water loss, and it has what's called a bactericidal effects, so bacteria killing effects. So their androgen activates the sebum secretions, and another homeostatic imbalance. So whiteheads, they are accumulation of oil in your sebaceous glands. Now, when those accumulations are oxidized, it becomes a blackhead. Now, acne is different. It's an inflammation of the sebaceous glands. So those can be considered pimples, and this is usually caused by some sort of bacteria, usually a staphylococcus bacteria. Now, there's seborrhea, which is also called cradle cap in infants. That's called it's basically a overactive sebaceous glands. So it's your skin becomes very oily and very scaly, and careful washing usually helps to remove the oil. Although you still have overactive sebaceous glands though. Let's talk about nails. So they're scale-like modifications made up of hard keratin, and then the nail matrix is responsible for nail growth, and we'll learn what the nail matrix is later. And its purpose really is to be used as tools to pick up things. There's really no other physiological purpose. So let's take a look at this nail right here. So you have nail folds. The skin has to fold on the nail so it can keep it in place. So there's the proximal nail fold right there. So see it folds right there. And there are lateral nail folds folding right here. Then let's take a look at the other anatomical structures. There's the nail plate. I call it the nail body. It's actually called the nail body. Then after that, there's the hyponychium, which is the space below the nail and the anterior portion of the nail. And then there's the cuticle, also called the eponychium, which is this free edge of skin right there. And then there's the lanula, which is this crescent-shaped thing. And the lanula is actually a superior view of what's called your nail matrix. And your nail matrix is a section that creates the nail. Is the section of mitotically active cells that create the nail. And then the nail lies on the nail bed, which is an extension of the skin, the epidermis, right there. You see, and that's pretty much it, I think. Yep. Now let's continue. So let's talk about the hair. So hair is made up of hard keratin as well. And the benefit of hard keratin is that it doesn't flake. So the main regions of the hair are the shaft, which we see, and the root, which is inside the skin. So the layers of the hair itself, not talking about the follicle, but the hair itself, is just the medulla, the cortex, and the cuticle. The medulla is just a bunch of cells with a few air spaces. The cortex is made up of several layers of cells, and they're flattened cells. And then there's the cuticle, which has a bunch of cells that line up on each other like shingles on the top of a roof of a house. They're kind of like that, the cuticle. And fun fact, split ends are caused by the wearing away of the cuticle at the ends of the hair. So let's talk about the structure of the follicle. So the hair bulb contains hair follicle receptors, also known as the hair root plexus. So these receptors are just nerve endings on the bulb. So that's how you sense things on your hair, touching your hair, sense things on your skin. So layers of the follicle consist of the outer CT connective tissue root sheath, and then inside there's the epidermal glassy membrane. So that's the basal layer of the epidermis, and you'll see what I mean when I show you a picture. And then after that, there are two other root sheaths. Then after that, there's the hair raising. One thing to mention is the hair raising and goosebumps that are caused by erector pili muscles associated with hair. So there are, remember that small muscle that I showed you in the original skin picture? Those actually cause goosebumps, and those actually cause your hair to be raised. So I'll show you these pictures next time, because I'm running out of time. So I'll see you next.